Welcome to TV Crew Talk. I'm Howie. Today I have a special guest who I've been friends with for over 30 years. He's a former college roommate of mine. Welcome to the show, Frank Campagna.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Frank, thanks for joining us. So we met many years ago back in college.
Yeah.
I think you graduated in 1990.
92.
So you were at Plattsburgh for 2 years before graduating while I was there. Tell us, how did Plattsburgh State prepare you for your job or your TV career?
Sure. Yeah, so I always kind of knew I wanted to get into TV broadcasting. I didn't know what exactly. So I toured a couple of different schools, and the thing about Plattsburgh that always stuck out was they always tell you, you can touch equipment from day one. Right. You don't have to wait till you're a junior, which that's what they always told you about other schools. I don't know if that was true or not, but that's what they always told you at Plattsburgh. So I jumped in head first, and I think it was my literally freshman year that we took that class, 229 it was called, where they were having you run out with equipment and shoot music videos, and I just fell in love with it, and then very shortly after that, they throw you onto the TV station, and I still tell people to this day, we had a cable station, we had 12 hours of programming a week or whatever it was, and it was, we were producing shows. So, yeah, I think it really prepared me for production life, where a lot of people, when I came out of college that were diving into production, didn't have that sort of background.
Right.
And we did, we kind of did every job that there was to do.
What shows did you produce in PSTV?
At PSTV,
was it Soundstage?
Yeah, no, there was a movie review show called, I think when I produced it was called Entertainment, Movies, and News, and then they switched the name to a better name, which I should have thought of, which was called Sight and Sound.
Right.
So that was one of the shows I produced, and then I directed some of the talk shows, North Country Nightly, and really, the thing I remember the most was I don't know if you ever did Newswatch 10, which was...
No, I didn't.
Right, which was this crazy class where you produce a live newscast every morning, and that was one of those shows where you literally learned every role there was to learn,
As
directing.
A freshman and sophomore, I remember watching you guys do that show, and no way.
Right. It was almost like our own little fraternity. You became so close to all those people because you were spending, 12 hours a day with those people. You would wake up in the morning and say, I have to shoot a story today. I have to figure out what I'm going to shoot. That was my role for this week. And then other weeks it was, you're going to be the director this week, and you kind of figured out what you fell in love with.
Now, one of the best things that came out of Plattsburgh for me was my internship at the PBS station my entire senior year.
Mm-hmm.
I got great experience. Did you do an internship in college?
Yeah. So I knew I wanted to come back home to New York City. I grew up in the Bronx and lived in Westchester. So I looked for internships in New York, and I think I looked at NBC and MTV, and I ended up getting an internship at MTV News. And this was the summer of '92, which was the Choose or Lose campaign. It was the first time they were getting involved in politics. So I got to go to the Democratic convention, and it was a really involved internship. It was MTV News, which was new at the time, and they threw 3 or 4 of us onto MTV News, and we were really helping out. We were logging tapes and diving in, and again, that was where I first experienced people that were interning there didn't have TV as a background. I was a business major and decided to become an MTV News intern. I'm like, well, do you know anything about TV production? And they didn't, So I already felt like I had a leg up on some of that, some of those people.
Now, obviously, knowing you for all these years, I know what your job was, and you were, having one job for all these years in our business is almost unheard of.
Right.
Let alone having a full-time job, because most of the jobs are freelance based.
Right.
So, because we've known each other so long, I know what your first job out of college was. Tell us how you got to Sesame Street.
Sure. So actually, it was my second job out of college. My first job, that's okay. My first job, nobody knows about it, but I left MTV, the internship, and I took a job, whatever job I could find at MTV in the library. I was a tape librarian, and it was so far removed from production, and I was trying to get work at MTV, and I always tell people it was all short-term work, it was all freelance, and it was all 6-month contracts, and everybody had blue hair and purple, and earrings, and I just didn't feel like I fit in. And so I was looking for stuff outside, and my girlfriend at the time, who ended up becoming my wife, and now we're divorced, but she had a sister who worked at Sesame Street in the international department, and she told me about a job that was available. And again, it was a short-term job, but it sounded a lot more interesting than what I was doing at the time, which was pulling tapes off a shelf. So I took a leap, and I moved over to Sesame Street on a 3-month contract as a production assistant in the international department, and that's kind of how I got my foot in the door. And then from there, the great thing about the international department was, like, we have PAs on Sesame Street in the production unit who, when we're in production, you got PAs that are kind of, getting meals prepared for the crew or stuff like that, whereas in the international group, it was such a small group, they really needed bodies that knew what they were doing. And so they literally threw me into logging tapes and going to edit sessions and just sort of diving in, and that led to, getting extended and ended up being there for 30 years and, basically did every possible production job there was and kind of pivoted from international and, I got to travel to a lot of different countries, and we can, talk about.
Now you're a 2-time Emmy Award-winning producer-director.
Right.
Take us through some of your responsibilities in those roles.
Sure. So, I'll just talk about my international stuff a little bit. So,
Sure.
For a while, I was the international person, and one of the things I always tell people is, just throw whatever they throw at you, just take. Because, like, at one point early on in my career, they said, we're going to send you to China. I was 27 years old. They're going to send you to China. We want you to make sure they dub our content, properly. I don't know anything about dubbing. Well, we're going to send you there to do it. We just want to make sure you stay on schedule. So force them to do our stuff. So they send me to China at the age of 27, and they bring me with an interpreter, and they tell me, and I'm telling these people, Ernie sounds like this. Hey, woo. I'm doing the voices. I'm trying to get through it. Push comes to shove. They did what they were supposed to do. I come back, and everybody says, you did a great job. All I did was stand there but from that, I became the dubbing guy. So then anytime there was a dubbing project, I was the guy. And it's just like one of those things where I was in the right place at the right time. I did a decent job, and then you come back with a reputation of being the dubbing guy. So,
right.
That's one of the stories I always tell people. I think I spoke at Plattsburgh on one of their presentations, or did a presentation there, and I was just like, whatever they throw at you, take.
Right.
And it was on one of those trips where, and so, for a long time I did the international route. I went to China and South Africa.
Amazing.
And a bunch of different places. And on one of those trips, we were doing a director's workshop, and this longtime director at Sesame Street, Lisa Simon, became like a mentor to me. And we were on one of these trips, and I was there for another reason, but I was in the studio with her, and I was asking questions, and she was like, you really have a good eye for this. When we get back, I'm going to sponsor you to get into the Directors Guild.
Oh, wow.
And you can try your hat at that. So she got me in as a associate director, and that kind of pivoted my career a little bit. And I still had my production work, but then I started doing some freelance AD work for Sesame Street, and that kind of really brought me back to my Plattsburgh days. That was like my first love, is having headsets on and really
right.
just telling people what to do, and and so that was like the second part of my career at Sesame, was sort of doing the DGA stuff and the AD stuff.
So now that you brought up mentors, tell me how mentors helped shape your career besides Lisa, and maybe go into a little more depth about that.
Sure. Yeah, Lisa was, I would say, my main mentor, and she passed away now, but she was basically, she kind of held my hand through it, because the AD role can be very difficult, and Sesame Street, is a at that time was a controlling environment, and there was a long-time ADs that were wanted to hold on to their work, and I totally understand that now.
Right.
So, but she would basically hand pick me to say, I want you to work on these days, and when I didn't do something right, she would pull me aside and tell me what I needed to work on, and really help get my skills up. And it got to the point though where they were only putting me with Lisa, and I'd have to say to them, like, put me on with another director so I could learn how other directors work and things like that. So then they slowly started putting me on with other directors, and somebody else would pull me aside. You're better than I thought. I thought you were only Lisa's guy. I'm like, no, I've been here long enough now to know what I'm doing. So sometimes you also.
I'm huge into mentors and coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning of my career, I had several mentors, and then when I kind of pivoted out of camera work, I had business coaches, because
Right.
there's a lot to learn. And
Right.
I always say the second you stop learning, you stop growing.
Right.
Know?
Yeah.
So talk to it. You know, your son was born or was diagnosed with autism.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us how that you brought that into your career.
Sure. So in a way, it really affected my career in a way too, because that's the reason why I got out of the international work. So they were pegging me to go to Indonesia and take over this major project, and it was going to be a very prestigious thing, but it was right at the time when my son was diagnosed. So I literally had to go to my boss at the time and be like, I know I'm an international producer, but I don't think I can do this anymore. And I think I need to either work on lower profile projects, or can you sort of shift me to more domestic work? And so at that time, I kind of, sometimes I think about it, was it a step back or a step sideways? Probably, but it was necessary at the time. So they put me on some lower profile international projects that didn't require as much travel, but that also got me experience in producing home videos. And for like a big part of my later career there just became being so well versed in the Sesame Street library that I knew, somebody had a request of, I need a segment on, emotions with Grover and Ernie. Like I knew it off the top of my head because
Right.
I'd been there for so long, and part of my role was also picking library content for other productions. So I became like what they call the curation guy. Like people would come to me and ask me, what segments to use for certain things. Yeah.
And so, how did your work with autism and the Autism Daddy help develop the autistic character in Sesame Street that
Sure.
I know you were extremely, involved with?
Yeah, so basically two things kind of happened concurrently. Like I at one point, somewhere when my son was about 8 years old, I decided to start writing and blogging about raising a kid with autism. And because dads don't usually write and express their emotions as much as moms do, there's tons of mom bloggers out there, but not a lot of dads, I became wildly popular. And I also didn't show my face or my son's face, so it became like a mystery of who is this guy. I did that because I didn't want to show my son's face. He
Right.
didn't, and I just wanted to keep my identity anonymous. And so it became wildly popular as to who I was. Who is this guy, Autism Daddy? At the same time, Sesame Street has a bunch of outreach initiatives. They do stuff for military families. They do stuff for incarcerated kids. And they always talked about doing stuff for the autism community. So I was always in the back of the room saying, when this finally happens, please,
Right,
I'm your guy, I'm
Right.
your guy. So at one point, they finally bit the bullet and decided they were going to do autism content, and I became the producer on the films. Sometimes I get a lot of credit for the autistic character. That didn't necessarily come through me, but basically what I ended up having a big part in was the first thing we ever launched were all these films with families,
Okay.
which was like the highlight of my career, which basically was to work with filmmakers and like show a day in the life of families with autism.
That's amazing.
So yeah, so basically in, I think it was 2015, we ended up launching this See Amazing in All Children initiative, which started out with all these films, and then there was there was a character, Julia, who at the time was only going to be in a storybook. And I always told people at Sesame, when the autism community sees this character, they're going to say, why isn't she in the show?
Right.
And that's exactly what happened. It was like, everybody loved what we put out. There was like almost
awesome.
no negativity, but it was all about, that's great that you have a character, but why isn't she in the show? So push comes to shove, 2 or 3 years later, they end up developing a full-on Muppet character, and yeah, and that was great.
And I know you spoke, around the country at several different conferences, and
Right.
people would bring you in to speak on the subject.
Yeah, so basically, at one point, Autism Daddy came to have about 100,000 followers.
It's amazing.
And some college in Utah was like, have you ever thought about, doing public speaking? And I'm like, no. And they're like, well, write up a presentation of what you think, you might want to talk about and throw it to us, and we'll see what we can do. So I looked at my blog posts, and I know that people like top 10 lists, so
Okay.
top 10 this, top 10 that. So I came up with 10 things that, what was it? 10 things that every autism parent should know, or something like that. And I just kind of recompiled some of my blog posts. I sent them the presentation. They said, we love it. We want you to be the keynote speaker. I'm like, whoa, my first one out the gate. So I was like, all right. I dove in head first, did that. That, got standing ovations. And then I, kind of pivoted into a side hustle and became,
Right.
Autism Daddy, the speaking
It's
guy.
amazing.
COVID kind of, put that aside, and so I kind of have to bring that back again. But yeah, that was my Autism Daddy hustle for a while.
Yeah, hopefully this podcast can help maybe
Right.
relaunch that.
Right.
So I have to ask, because I'm a Sesame Street fan,
Mm-hmm.
who's your favorite character to work with?
To work with?
Big Bird, Elmo, who?
That's a good question. To work with, I would say Elmo's great. Abby Kadabi is great.
Uh-huh.
And this is also because of the puppeteers that are
Right.
behind them. Grover's great. Cookie Monster's great. They're all great in their
Awesome.
own way. Growing up, I was a big Cookie Monster and Grover fan, just because of the comedy element. There's a classic bit of what was the one I'm thinking of? I lost it, but yeah, those were my ones that
Right.
growing up that I loved.
So unfortunately, I know your time at Sesame Street has come to an end.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see yourself pivoting now within the production world?
Yeah, I mean, I was there for 31 years. My staff job at Sesame Street is now, gone. I was laid off with a bunch of other people at
Because
the
they've
workshop.
had some issue in terms of there's no platform for it to air on.
It's going to Netflix.
It is,
so
okay.
yeah, so basically it was on HBO for many years, and then the HBO deal kind of went away, and they were shopping for a home. So it just recently got picked up by Netflix. But like every other show, the number of episodes is probably going to get cut. The streaming landscape has drastically changed. So there was pretty big layoffs at Sesame, and I was a part of that. But thankfully, I was able to hold on to my DGA work with them. So I'm hoping that when they go back into production, I'll still be
Great.
one of their ADs. And now I'm out there for the first time in 31 years, sort of as a freelancer, trying to figure out what my next step is. And I've been chatting with some career coaches and literally trying to figure out, like, do I want a full-time staff job, or do I want to pick up side hustles and
Right.
do some freelance work in production and pick up the Autism Daddy thing again and make that a side career, and literally running financial numbers in my head, figuring out, like, okay, if I could pick up a quarter of the money here and a quarter of money there, and do something for pick up some passion projects, and
Right.
you know
No. Maybe, starting a podcast about the Autism Daddy could help relaunch that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the things. Like I was just talking to somebody the other day about, I've sort of let it lay dormant for so long that the only platform I was really big on is Facebook.
Right.
And a lot of the bloggers that I used to be friendly with, who had, I don't know, like less followers than I had, not to be
Right.
but they've moved over to TikTok and are basically reaping the financial benefits over TikTok. And I'm like, if I could bring over a third of my followers over
Right.
to TikTok, I
Be
could.
huge.
So I was literally just yesterday watching a woman do a video on how to make TikTok videos and how to edit it in the app, and
Right.
and it's just a skill that I need to learn. And I'm sure I'll pick it up,
Absolutely.
or I have to hire some
Someone to help.
some 30-year-old to help me
Right.
put it together. But yeah, that's something I'm really thinking about, is like sort of revamping the Autism Daddy and moving it to different platforms.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your time. I really
Sure.
appreciate it. And, looking forward to your next big project.
Thank you. Me too.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Well, this has been TV Crew Talk. I'm your host, Howie Zales. I just want to thank Frank Campagna again, and we'll see you for our next episode.